Hollywood, California, 1965. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, is 3 weeks into an official U.S. tour with her husband, Lord Snowdon. The itinerary has moved through Washington, D.C., and a New York leg where she and Snowdon visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art and walked Fifth Avenue. Now the tour has arrived in Los Angeles, and the social circuit here operates by a different set of rules. Rules built not on bloodlines or acts of parliament, but on box office returns and Grammy nominations and sold-out concert venues. Tonight, the venue is a party organized by Sharman Douglas, a well-connected socialite and the daughter of former American ambassador Lewis Williams Douglas. Margaret and Douglas have known each other since at least Margaret's early 20s, when Douglas ran with the social set the British press had dubbed the Margaret Set. This is meant to be comfortable ground, a room curated by a friend, attended by people who know the codes, who understand what it means to receive a princess. Elizabeth Taylor is in the room, wearing the diamond Richard Burton recently gave her. The stone is large enough to attract attention from across the party. Grace Kelly has come in from Monaco, and somewhere in the room, by all documented accounts, not looking for an invitation to work, is Judy Garland. Margaret wants to hear her sing. She doesn't cross the room herself. She sends an aide. The aide delivers the command. Her Royal Highness would like to hear Miss Garland sing. According to the biographer Theo Aronson, who documented the episode in his biography of Princess Margaret, published in the late 1970s, more than a decade after the event itself, Garland's reply was immediate and precise. "Go and tell that nasty, rude little princess that we've had enough of her. No concert." The aide carries the refusal back across the room. Popular retellings have sometimes placed this incident in a Manhattan restaurant, and the image has a certain cinematic durability. White linen, candlelight, a royal command drifting across a dining room. The biographical sources that have documented the episode since Aronson's original account consistently put it in Hollywood during the 1965 tour. Vanity Fair, citing the Telegraph, placed the episode within a cluster of events in which Margaret had an aide ask whether the triple threat could perform on the spot. The Daily Express ran the headline, "Judy Garland's savage rejection of Princess Margaret revealed," in December 2019. The Evening Standard's April 2020 reconstruction described Margaret as having upset Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, and Judy Garland in one evening. All three incidents tied to the same Hollywood gathering, most accounts identifying Sharman Douglas as the host. The geography matters less than the mechanism. A command was issued, through a proxy, and returned unexecuted. That proxy matters precisely because it reveals the institutional architecture of the demand. Margaret didn't confront Garland directly. She dispatched a functionary, which was the palace method of doing things. A royal aide crossing a party room and conveying a message from Her Royal Highness was itself a form of social force. The entire deference apparatus channeled into one person walking toward you. The aide's presence pre-legitimized the command before a word was spoken. It converted, "I'd like to hear you sing," into, "Her Royal Highness has expressed a wish that Miss Garland perform." The formal third person made it bigger than a personal preference. It made it something approaching an official expectation. When the refusal came back through the same channel, it bypassed all of that framing. The mechanism had returned empty. And for a system built on the assumption that the mechanism would always return full, this was something it had no established procedure for. To understand why Margaret believed she had the right to issue that command in the first place, you need to understand the structural position she had occupied for the previous 13 years. Princess Margaret Rose of York was born at Glamis Castle in Angus, Scotland, on August 21, 1930, the second child of the Duke and Duchess of York. At birth, she was fourth in the line of succession. In 1936, Her grandfather, George V, died. Her uncle Edward VIII abdicated to marry the twice-divorced American Wallis Simpson. Her father became King George VI, and the constitutional furniture of the Windsor family rearranged entirely. Her sister Elizabeth became heir presumptive. Margaret became the spare. The heir and spare principle is ancient and practical. One child to inherit the title, a second as insurance if the first doesn't survive. The BBC described the adage in 2023 as referring to aristocratic families needing an heir to inherit a title or an estate, and the spare as the insurance policy. What the principle generates in the spare's lived experience is a position loaded with ceremony, public expenditure, and the full social apparatus of royal deference, but without the accountability mechanism that theoretically justifies those privileges in exchange for service. The heir has a destiny inscribed in the constitutional order, duties to grow into, an eventual office that gives every earlier decision consequence. The spare has the same titles and the same deference and, structurally, considerably less reason to develop restraint. George VI died on February 6, 1952. Elizabeth became queen. Margaret was 21 years old, and her position in the constitutional architecture of the United Kingdom had effectively reached its terminal point. She attended the coronation at Westminster Abbey on June 2, 1953, as a witness, not as someone being invested with authority. She was never crowned, never inaugurated, never given a constitutional role of any kind. The Civil List Act of 1952 established her personal annual annuity at £6,000, public money, rising to £15,000 should she marry, which she did in 1960, when she wed the society photographer Anthony Armstrong Jones, who became Lord Snowdon. The royal household's official biography of Margaret describes her as having played an active role in the royal family's public work, supporting the Queen and focusing on welfare, the arts, and charitable causes. This is the best case characterization. Genuine charity work, genuine arts engagement, secondary support to the monarch. What it doesn't describe is a role with any external performance measure, no ledger against which her contribution could be audited, no reckoning built into the arrangement that would tell her where her authority actually ended. What followed was a lifetime of institutional privilege without institutional accountability. And that combination produced a woman who could send an aide across a party room in Hollywood with the confident expectation that it would work. Craig Brown spent years assembling Ma'am Darling, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret, published in 2017, drawing on memoirs, diaries, and accounts accumulated across decades. The portrait that emerges from Brown's own characterization, drawn from testimony across many sources, is of a chain-smoking, chain-drinking, man-eating monster with flashes of wit and unsteady charm. Brown's characterization, not a clinical assessment, but one built from testimony provided by a large and independent range of sources. The courtiers who attended her, the diarists who went home afterward and wrote down what happened, the friends who found her genuinely brilliant, and the acquaintances who found the evening spent in her company corrosive. One reviewer noted that Margaret's party trick seems to have been to lull people into a false sense of security and camaraderie, and then demolish them with regal, rank-pulling put-downs that are masterpieces of the art. Her morning routine, as documented by Brown, ran as follows. Breakfast in bed at 9 a.m., followed by approximately 2 hours in bed listening to the radio and reading the newspapers, which she would leave scattered across the floor around her, and chain smoking. Around 12:30, a vodka. Brown also describes her combining the smoking and drinking by gluing matchboxes onto tumblers so she could strike matches while still holding her glass. It's a very specific image. It's also the image of a woman who has never, at any fundamental level, been required to consider the inconvenience she represents to others. Royal protocol dictated that no guest could leave before Margaret did. if she was in good spirits and disposed toward staying, and if she decided to sing, which she was capable of doing, having developed a genuine, if not extraordinary, soprano voice. The evening could extend until 2 or 3 in the morning. With everyone seated politely at a table, they had no mechanism for leaving. The game she and Snowdon played at those dinners, tearing off a piece of bread each time a guest said something cliched, the person with the most pieces declared the winner, is almost charming in its shared contempt. It's also the game of two people for whom it has never occurred that their guests might have somewhere else to be. She was quoted as saying, "Disobedience is my joy." Whether this is self-aware wit from a woman who understood her constraints, or a statement of operating principle from someone who had rarely faced the consequences of disobedience, is probably both at once. She signed her personal checks simply as Margaret. No title, no last name. Just the one name she assumed was sufficient. The implicit belief that Margaret was unambiguous, because who else would be writing you a check? By 1965, this was the person who arrived in Hollywood with an aide and a command. The 1965 U.S. tour was officially described by Margaret's authorized biographer, Christopher Warwick, as an occasion when she and Lord Snowdon were the perfect choice to represent the crown in America. The documented outcomes of the Hollywood portion of that tour suggest the assessment was overly optimistic. Hollywood in 1965 wasn't a room where the rules governing British social life operated as defaults. Elite American celebrity culture in the mid-1960s had its own hierarchy, and that hierarchy was built almost entirely on what you had actually done. Box office rankings, Grammy Awards, Academy Award nominations, sold-out venues. In this specific social world, the operating assumption was that status derived from verified achievement, and Margaret's civil list annuity and royal title, while objects of American fascination in the abstract, didn't automatically command deference from people who had spent 40 years earning their own. By the time Margaret arrived in Los Angeles in 1965, Judy Garland had been professionally active for more than 4 decades. Under contract to MGM since 1935, The Wizard of Oz in 1939, Meet Me in St. Louis in 1944, A Star is Born in 1954, Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. In 1959, a 7-night sold-out run at the Metropolitan Opera House. Then, on April 23, 1961, Carnegie Hall. Rex Reed, who was present, later wrote about an audience that included just about every celebrity in New York at that time, many of them reaching out to touch Judy Garland. The Grammy-winning live album Capitol Records released from that concert has never gone out of print. Garland had devised the program herself. She described working it out on the inside of a matchbook. She selected the songs, designed the lighting, conceived the 2-act, 1-woman concert format that became the industry standard for female solo performers in subsequent decades. From 1963 to 1964, she hosted The Judy Garland Show on CBS, earning Emmy nominations for herself and for the series. The concert years from 1960 to 1965 have been described by Garland scholars as her golden era, an unprecedented career renaissance built directly on top of a hepatitis crisis so severe that her career appeared finished. In 1960, she was at the Beverly Hills Hotel alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., attending a Democratic fundraiser for John F. Kennedy. A peer in that room, not entertainment on call. When Princess Margaret's aide crossed the party and delivered the command that Her Royal Highness wished to hear Miss Garland sing, the command was directed at a woman who had built her standing one concert at a time across 40 years. Garland knew exactly how self-important the princess was, and she refused to comply. According to Aronson's account, repeated by Brown and the subsequent press coverage chain, The response was, "Go and tell that nasty, rude little princess that we've had enough of her." A second version of the reply circulates in later accounts, that she didn't take orders from anyone under 60. Whether either version precisely records what was said, both reflect the same quality of response. This isn't a diva refusing to work. This is a working professional declining to be treated as furniture. The word nasty is a moral judgment. Rude is a behavioral description. Little, used in a context where the command has just been delivered by the full weight of royal proxy machinery, is a diminishment. The title is stripped of its honorifics. Princess is named as just a word, belonging to someone not large enough to have this claim on Judy Garland's talent. The aide carries it back. The Garland refusal was the sharpest moment of the evening, but it wasn't the only incident. Elizabeth Taylor's diamond had been one of the most discussed pieces of jewelry in Hollywood that year. Large, visible, a specific gift from Richard Burton. Margaret reportedly asked to try it on. When she returned it, she called it vulgar. The Evening Standard later noted that this incident had occurred before the Garland episode. Things didn't improve after that. Whether the vulgar remark was intended as wit, Taylor received it as a judgment on her taste and on the man who had given it to her. The story of the diamond and that word became one of the standard exhibits in any accounting of Margaret's conduct toward the Hollywood elite. Grace Kelly, who had given up an Academy Award-winning film career in 1956 to take on the genuine constitutional and diplomatic responsibilities of Monaco, came away from the same evening having taken offense at something Margaret said or implied. The specific words haven't been documented. Multiple accounts confirm only that Kelly took umbrage. 3 women, 1 evening. All 3 had earned their positions through work, as an actress, as a princess of an actual functioning principality, and as one of the great concert performers of the 20th century. All 3 came away having been diminished. Then there's Cher. Her 2024 memoir describes an occasion where she and Sonny Bono were asked to perform in Margaret's presence. The framing is direct. We couldn't say no to Princess Margaret. The performance was, in Cher's telling, a fiasco that left her mortified. What the account documents isn't the fiasco, but the couldn't, the sense that refusal wasn't a real option, that the social pressure of Margaret's presence had already answered the question before anyone thought to ask it. The expectation of compliance was atmospheric. You didn't need to be explicitly told. You already understood. Garland wasn't operating on that understanding. The pattern extends well beyond 1965 and the Sharman Douglas party. Brown's book catalogues Margaret making John Lennon blush. Marlon Brando, not someone easily reduced to social awkwardness, falling silent in her company. At a London gala, Margaret greeting film producer Robert Evans and making a point of expressing a low opinion of his work. The put-downs are calibrated precisely, stripping the achievement from the person, delivered with apparent composure. A 1987 documentary called Royal Servants Behind Closed Doors is reported to have included a characterization from Margaret's chief of staff that Princess Margaret treated people like human ashtrays. This is a single reported source and should carry that weight, but it names something the documented pattern points toward, that the people closest to Margaret, staff, aides, the functionaries of the palace apparatus, were absorbing the cost of her behavior as a professional condition. That chief of staff reportedly kept a diary for 14 years. The aide mechanism that structured the Garland demand reveals something important about how the system operated. By dispatching a proxy rather than approaching Garland directly, Margaret was using the institutional method of royal aide crossing a party room and conveying a message from Her Royal Highness arrived already pre-authorized. The formality of delivery converted a personal preference into something approaching an official occasion. The aide legitimized the demand before it was spoken. This was the buffer the palace machinery maintained between Margaret's desires and their execution, the layer that insulated her from direct refusals, that smoothed awkward moments before they became incidents, that managed the social fallout that her behavior regularly generated. When the refusal came back through the same channel, the buffer had failed. Most people, as Cher's account demonstrates, felt they couldn't say no. The pressure was sufficient to produce compliance without the need for explicit consequences. You simply understood. This is what made Garland's refusal remarkable. Not that she was rude, not that she was unwell, not that she misunderstood the situation. She understood it precisely and sent back an answer anyway. Anne Glenconner served as Margaret's lady-in-waiting for more than 30 years and published her memoir, Lady-in-Waiting, in 2019 with an explicit purpose: to counter the perception of Margaret as spoilt and spiteful. People complained about Princess Margaret being difficult, she wrote. But I think quite often it was because she was bored or fed up. Not surprisingly, her idea of fun wasn't sitting next to the mayor, the bishop, and the chief of police for Sunday lunch. This is the sympathetic reading from the person who had the most sustained, intimate knowledge of Margaret over the longest time. The problem with boredom as a defense is that it requires everyone else to absorb its cost. Bored at dinner, the guests couldn't leave. Bored at a party, the performers were on call. The boredom was structural, not situational. It derived from having no consequential work to do, no office to fill, nothing to produce that could be measured against any external standard. Other people's time and other people's talent paid the price. Glenconner's memoir does not appear, based on available accounts of its contents, to include the Garland episode specifically. Warwick's authorized biography doesn't appear to document it either. The story's documented chain runs from Aronson's 1970s biography through Brown's 2017 book to the popular press. It's well-attested biographical tradition about Margaret's conduct, consistent with everything independently documented about how she moved through social situations, rather than a verified transcript confirmed by a named eyewitness to the specific exchange. What isn't in doubt is that the Hollywood portion of the 1965 tour went badly. What isn't in doubt is that Taylor, Kelly, and Garland all came away from the same cluster of events with documented cause for grievance. What isn't in doubt is that Garland didn't perform for Princess Margaret that evening. The spare's problem is structural, not personal. Margaret's position as the second-born daughter of a monarch placed her in a category that receives all the ceremonial apparatus of royalty, without the constitutional machinery that justifies it. Academic analysis of the heir-spare dynamic describes the spare's position as one that is close to power and privilege, but lacks a clear constitutional role, which can foster frustration, identity conflict, or attention-seeking behavior. Andrew Morton, the royal biographer, has described the challenge for every spare as crafting a relevant, purposeful life, when the institutional structure hasn't built one in. The Civil List Act of 1952 established Margaret's personal annuity at £6,000 per year, public money, drawn from the National Treasury. A 1952 Hansard debate records, "I would have no objection at all to the proposed allowance for Princess Margaret, who, at the present time, is of marriageable age." By 1990, the official provision for her household had grown to £219,000 per year, though the majority of civil list allocations, roughly 70%, covered staff salaries and official overhead rather than personal expenditure. The provision existed to enable the discharge of public duties. In 1978, the New York Times reported that Princess Margaret's way of life provokes protests, describing her conduct as subject to sharp attack in the British press. Buckingham Palace confirmed that year that she would retain her pay and privileges as a member of the royal family. The institution held the line. Her sister's position in the same institution looked entirely different. Queen Elizabeth II became queen at 25, having watched her father, a quietly dutiful man who had never sought the throne, work himself toward an early death in service to it. She carried the constitutional weight of the Commonwealth for 70 years. 15 prime ministers received at Buckingham Palace, every parliament opened, every Commonwealth tour undertaken, every Christmas broadcast delivered. The accountability was total and built into the nature of the office. It appeared in the court circular, in the official schedule of engagements, in the diplomatic record of state visits and investitures and constitutional functions across 7 decades. When Elizabeth met artists and performers, and she met thousands of them across royal variety performances and investitures and state functions spanning her entire reign, the dynamic was different. At the 2009 Royal Variety performance, she met Lady Gaga backstage after the show. The footage is still findable. She is smiling, apparently at ease, engaging with someone who has earned her own global standing through professional work. Gaga makes a deep curtsy. The Queen accepts it without apparent condescension. During Elizabeth's reign, she granted a knighthood to Paul McCartney in 1997, a knighthood to Elton John in 1998, and a damehood to Julie Andrews in 2000. Formal national recognitions inscribed in the official record, the state declaring that careers built through artistic achievement merited institutional honor. Elizabeth's monarchy recognized the work as work. Margaret's relationship to the arts was, by most accounts, genuinely engaged. She had real cultural taste. Some of her friendships with artists were substantive. The Guardian's review of Brown's book described her as drawn to bohemians, suggesting a woman who was aware of the constraints of her own position and sought relief from them in the company of people with more freedom. The problem wasn't a lack of appreciation for what artists did. The problem was the confusion between appreciation and ownership. There's a precise difference between recognizing what Judy Garland had built and believing you have the right to summon it on demand through a proxy command at a party. Margaret genuinely had the former. The 1965 Hollywood evening demonstrates she also assumed the latter. When the aide carried the refusal back across the room, the reversal was complete. Everything the palace had built around Margaret, the protocols, the titles, the forms of address, the social architecture of rooms organized around her comfort, had failed to produce the expected result in this particular room, in this particular city, in front of a woman who had built her standing one performance at a time across 40 years. Hollywood in 1965 ran on a different currency entirely. Box office returns, Grammy standings, sold-out venues, achievement that could be measured and named. In a room governed by those rules, the royal coin bought nothing. The mechanism that had always returned full came back empty. And the woman who sent it back empty did so in one sentence, without rising from her chair.